All right, friends, it is week 8, lecture 2. So that means we've got one more lecture after this. And we are continuing our knowledge of WebSockets. Just as a reminder, today is the last day for anything to be turned in. And so whether that's assignments, whether that's discussion questions, whether anything, whatever that is, today's the last day to do that. So please make sure that everything is submitted there. If there's anything that is needed, please feel free to reach out to me and we can try to handle that accordingly. And we got a little bit of time just because we've got some stuff, we have some breaks. So if you need anything, feel free to reach out. This is the most optimal time. Joseph, just a reminder, we don't have class next week nor the week after. So just so you know, class doesn't start up again until the 8th. So you've got a nice little 2 weeks, nice little 2 weeks of time for you to take a break. My encouragement would be like, take a little bit of a break. Give yourself some space to breathe, do some stuff, self-care that you need. And then after that, hop back in and, kind of keep it going from there. But my encouragement would be maybe the first week, just make sure that you are taking a little bit of a break so that way you have access to, your brain and a little bit of self-care there. But yeah, the 8th will be your next stack. Whether you go to project and algorithms or if you're taking another language, it'll be the 8th that you start. Cool. So what we talked about yesterday, and we're just going to kind of go back through this, give an intro to yesterday, walk through the code that we did, and then we're just going to continue this, is we talked about this tool called WebSockets. Now, what we've historically done within React is we've used HTTP methods to make requests and responses, right? Where we use our .gets, our gets, our post, our patch, our put, and our delete. And we've made these requests and we send it over to our backend. So we make it from the front end. Say, cool, can you get all albums or all movies? Our server does something and it sends us back a request. And once that request is sent, the end of that conversation, or that's the end of that conversation, right? Until we make a new request. Well, with that request response cycle, because it stops the conversation when we're starting to deal with sort of messaging, we want to make sure that we're not just having to constantly request, did I get a new message? Did I get a new message? Did I get a new message? It'd be like if you've got your phone, right? And let's say Garrett and I are texting. I'm not constantly going in and checking my messages and refreshing and refreshing and refreshing and refreshing to see did Garrett text me back, did Garrett text me back, did Garrett text me back. What ends up happening is I get a notification that says, okay, now you've got, Garrett has texted you and I can go in and I can look at it. And so what we're doing is we're no longer relying on the communication session between our browser and our server. We are now relying on what we call event-driven responses. And that's what WebSockets as itself allows us to do. It allows us to use events so that way we don't have to keep constantly asking and pinging our server, because if you think about it from a scaled out perspective, if we're doing something like Discord, if we're doing something like Slack, some big messaging application, we would have to ping the server so many times per user, right? So every half of a second, every 500 milliseconds, right? You'd have to ping the server constantly. Let's say you had 1 million users, you're doing that. That's just too much. And you can overload your server. And so the big brains in tech were like, how do we do this better, right? How do we make sure that that's not the case? And so that's where WebSockets come in. And now instead of us constantly having to ask, hey, did you get a new message? Did you get a new message? Did I get a new message? We just say, hey, let me know. We're going to open up some communication and let me know when a new message comes. Let me know when you are when you get a new message, and let's just open up this communication and keep it open versus each time we make a request and get a response that closes. Let's just kind of open this up, and anytime a new event happens, which we're going to see as we start coding how events come into play, but every time a new event happens, then we can kind of get alerted and know that. This is the kind of, this is a visualization of what it would look like if we just use HTTP requests. If we constantly use that request response cycle to say, our client, do you have any messages? Server, no. How about now? No. How about now? Okay, yeah, Bob did send a message, and then it finally returns hello world, or returns, hey, how are you? And we want to make sure, especially if we've got multiple clients trying to ping the same server, it could get pretty overloaded. And so what a WebSocket does is it creates what we call a handshake or an agreement between our client and our server that says, hey, let me know if you get any messages. And they create this handshake, this agreement. It says, okay, great, I'll let you know. And then only once a new event happens, you get a new message, then it alerts the client and says, hey, boom, new message here. In the same way that if you're typing and then Discord pops up, that's open communication, right? And then you're only getting pinged and are told when a new message comes, and you're not, the server's not constantly having to ask the server, or the client's not constantly having to ask the server. Does that make sense? Any questions on that?
I guess if I do have any question, it's more like a theoretical question. This does make
Sure.
sense. But in theory, if we're doing something that's meant to say, hey, hold on to it, don't do anything until you get something, you're creating like a conditional, right? To some extent within that request. And what I'm wondering is how much can a server take of these types of requests versus other types of requests?
Yeah, great question. So this is not constantly pinging, so it's just creating a handshake. So that's the big thing is, well, let's take a step back. If I'm understanding your question correctly, you're saying, hey, only let me know when this happens. You're kind of identifying that as a conditional. You're saying, how many can this open up? How many of these kind of handshakes, open communication can a server handle? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah. So this is much, much easier for a server. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that goes into what kind of server you're using. So if you go to AWS, there's like T3, T3 Micro, Q4, like there's all kinds of different servers that have different optimizations and different things. And so it depends on there's a lot of nuancy things. Then you also implement these things called a load balancer, which kind of handles requests. Um, and so, maybe if you've ever joined Discord and it's kind of spinning, it might just be that, before it can open up this communication, there's some other requests. And so a load balancer will either send you to a different server, because oftentimes a company will have multiple servers running. It's not just like one server for a company. You'll have, a whole room or a whole host of servers. If you've ever played video games, um, like for example, Fortnite or you know, Overwatch or Call of Duty will have their own servers, and they're set up all over the nation. So that way you're interacting oftentimes with people regional to you. And it's because so that way requests don't have to travel so far, because tech all is just traveling through fiber optic cables. Every message and everything is just through cables. Like that's just how the internet works. And so that's why you want it regionally, like a little bit closer, because it's much faster. Um, but you would have load balancers, you would have multiple servers, and so you could just scale up at a much easier rate. Where this request is, you think about, one client is making a request here, whereas, one request in a day, maybe as you're logged in or as you're signed in, versus you're doing at least two a second. And so every minute you're doing what, 120 requests, and then every hour doing that times 60. And so that overwhelms the server a lot because it's trying to handle all of those. Whereas it can much easier scale just one person or one request when somebody's logged in. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Hmm.
I start to think about it, Will. Like I picture it, I always think about WebSockets and the scope, and I think about APIs over here. When I think like APIs is a request response, it's going to be open, it's going to be answered, and then the connection is done. With
Yeah.
WebSockets, it's meant for two-way data communication. So every time I see this picture in particularly, I just remember that sockets are made to always handle two-way data communication continuously when APIs have a request response, a promise that kind of ends the call
Hmm.
right away. So that's
Yeah.
how I think about it in my head, visualizing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's almost like sending an email versus being on the phone and me just sitting there, right? If you or coming into office hour, you can send me a message, on email, and then I can come back to you, and that's kind of the end until you send another email. Or you could sit in class or come to office hour, and then we're just having constant communication. It's just open for you to ask questions. Same sort of idea. But yeah,
Sure.
Garrett, that's a great additive there. Okay. Yeah, so that's what this is happening, and or that's what's going on. And so that's what a WebSocket does, right? Is it allows us to open up this handshake between our client and our server, and then have some communication. Now we use a tool called Socket.io, which is just a library that adds on to that in the same way that Mongoose allows us to write MongoDB kind of queries. Socket.io is just a tool for WebSockets that helps us kind of handle. It's a library that helps us handle this in a much easier way. So that's where Socket.io will come in, is that. And so what will happen is where's the, oh, hold on. I've got a great little, I just want to pull up something real quick. I'm so sorry. Just to kind of help explain. Let me find it. Something to help explain kind of what a socket does, because it's sitting on our server. Right here. There we go. It's sitting on our server. And then we just add in Socket.io. We add a WebSocket. So now what it does is it allows each of our clients to communicate in an easy way to this socket versus, again, having to constantly make pings to my server. So it's sitting on top of our server. That's really what a WebSocket does. It sits on top of our server and opens up that communication, that handshake for our communication. Now, there's a couple things we've got to do for that. And we've already sort of started with the code, but we'll make sure that we walk through it for you, Joseph. Is we are in the same way, because we're bringing in a library just like Mongoose. We need to install that. So it's on both sides, both on my server side and my client side, where we are installing Socket.io. So this is my server side of Socket.io, and the client is Socket.io-client. And so we're bringing that in. So that way each can communicate with one another. Again, it's just a library. In order for me to be able to have access to it, I need to bring that in as well. And looking at the code, we'll just kind of go to my server side real quick. There's a couple of different things that we can do. Now, we've also added in cores, and we've added in Express as always, because Express we want as our application, and then cores, we need to be able to communicate between my client and my server. So we have to have cores in there for that. And then lastly, we have Socket.io. And so what we did was before we even, or we didn't sort of modularize this out, there's not really a need for just learning this at the beginning. But what we did is we have our server.js file, and these things you've seen before. We've got our Express app cores. We brought that in. You've seen that. The new piece of information is our socket, is us actually creating a socket. And so us saying, hey, cool, let's create this WebSocket on our backend. And so in order for us to do that, we bring in socket, create a const socket, and we require it from our socket.io. And then this is something that's a little bit different. App.listen, if we hover over this, we can see by these two colons right here, what that tells us is anytime we're hovering over sort of a method of a class, and so in this case of our app, which is an Express application, this is a method. So a function associated to this class, anytime a function is associated to a class, we call it a method. But it's really just a function, just again, associated to a class. You can hover over it and see a bunch of stuff about it. And one thing you can look at is after this colon right here, it'll tell you what it returns back. So what it gives you back, and in this case is an instance of a server, right? Or actual server itself. And so what we typically did when we were learning is we just said app.listen, and it actually just created that server for us, and we ran it. And if you remember back when we were kind of dealing with our routes, we just said require, our routes. And we said we didn't need to assign that to any sort of variable, because we just want it to run one time, and then we don't need to deal with it anymore. And so that's what we did here is we would just have app.listen, we'd give it the port, give it a callback function, and then we just say this console log. But now that we actually want what it's returning, we're going to assign that into our to a variable called server. And the reason for that is when I am using IO. When I am using our socket, I need, and I'm going to call this IO, that I need to give it the server on which the socket needs to live, right? And so that's why I have to assign it here. This renders back and gives me a server, not renders back, sorry, returns a server. And I'm saying, hey, here's the server that we want to establish our socket on. And so we add that here. The second piece of information that we need is to give it our cores information. So we need to be able to say, hey, this is what you should expect when you're getting requests. Here's where I want you to open up communication to this specific origin. In this case, it's localhost 5173 because we have a Vite project. If you're using Create React App, obviously that'd be 3000. But we're saying, hey, expect from a client side, there's going to be some requests. And here is where we're good to go. Like, go ahead and allow requests from here. We have a couple of different things, different attributes where we're saying, hey, you can use get and post methods. We're allowing headers and credentials are true. All of this is on the platform. So it's all right here for you. But these are really, this is just us configuring our server, configuring our socket, not our server, sorry, our socket. So that way we can have it live on our server and be able to take in requests from our client side. Cool. I'm going to pause there. Any questions?
Nope.
Cool. Great. Now we called this IO, and this is an instance of our socket. And so this is our connection, right? This is our socket that has been created on this server. Well, there's a lot of methods associated to our sockets. And so one of them is connection. And so this is just establishing a connection with our front end. And so this keyword of connection is really what our server is going to look at and say, cool, does this match? Okay, it does. We're good to go. This is a connection. What am I doing? I'm taking my socket, and for right now, I'm just console logging new client connected. This is ran and saying, cool, this is a connection. This on is just a method of our socket. And this is a huge, this is something that's really important because everything that we do within this connection, or sorry, everything we want to do, every event, this is an event that we're listening to. And every event that we want to do needs to live within this space right here. So once this is on, once we have our socket, then we say, okay, now I want you to listen for these new events. And we are going to create those events. We're going to create those events. So they're not necessarily like hard coded on, but we just need to now make them aware and say, cool, here's what I want you to listen to. Here's what I want you to hear. Cool. Now on our client side, we've done a couple things. We brought in browser router, React router DOM. We've dealt with that. We've got IO from socket IO client. So if I go to my package JSON, these are the two things that we've added. It's just React router DOM and socket IO dash client. And on my app side, we've just brought in both. And what we've done is here we're creating this piece of state that is just our socket connection. And so what this does is us creating a piece of state. Now we don't have a setter because we don't want to reset this. This is just a normal getter. And we're using this use state. And if we do a callback function in here, what this does is it allows us to run this callback function, but it only runs one time. It only runs once this is mounted. So we don't need to constantly deal with this connection piece. And it's this callback function where we're calling this IO. And what this IO is doing is we're saying, hey, I want you to look for a connection on colon 8000. And this colon 8000 is because we're just interpreting that it's coming from the same HTTP colon / localhost colon 8000. This is just a shorter way to write it because it's just inferred that they're coming from the same, localhost. And so this establishes our connection, or helps our connection or establishes, sorry, our piece of state or our socket, right? And saying, cool, this is where we are listening on. We've got this other piece of state that's called is connected and that we will eventually work with. And then we're using socket.connected. And so it's again checking to say, is this connected or not? And so, and then lastly, we've got this use effect that's running at the beginning. And what it's doing is it's console logging connected, great. But it's saying socket.on. And if you look at it, it matches our, goes up side by side. We have our IO.on connection. And so this is our socket.on connect, right? That's what we called it, was connect. And so that way, we've got a connection. And what we're doing is we're console logging. Each socket itself is going to have some information associated to it. And one of those is going to be a socket ID, right? We could console log the whole socket to see, but what we're doing is we're just saying, cool, socket.on connect, socket ID is what we're console logging, just so that way we could see this is a way that we can see, okay, this is good to go. We have this information. And then lastly, we're setting some state as set is connected to true. And that's just our is connected here that we could eventually deal with. That way, if they're disconnected, we do something else. Or maybe, you know, you can sort of think about it. Maybe we don't want people who haven't logged in or haven't been connected to be able to view this. And so we could deal with this as connected by checking sort of in the same way we did session with Python. Is this person logged in? If they're not, kick them out. Something I haven't introduced, but wanted to kind of write some notes on and tell you guys is there's this something we call a cleanup function. And so it's just a function that's called when the component unmounts. So when we're off of this app JSX, or if we had this, you could do this on any of them. When we're unmounting this component, this is what we want to run. And so we're basically just disconnecting here. So if we were to unmount this app, it would just be disconnected. This is what we call a cleanup function. And then we don't have anything in our dependency array at the moment. Okay. So what our goal is we have these components. We've got a login where what we're wanting them to do is we're wanting them to basically just put like a username. So we're just gonna have a form that's got a username that we're gonna take, and they're gonna quote unquote log in. So they're just gonna put their username, press submit, and it's gonna take them to a chat room. And then in that chat room, they'll be able to type a message, and then another user, it'll automatically populate for the other user. And so if two people are logged in, they could type and then we could see it kind of out there. So that's our goal. That's what we're going to accomplish today by doing that. So let's jump in and start actually building this out. Cool. So we're in my login. There's a couple of things I know I'm going to need. I need to keep track of the username, right? And so I'm going to use some use state so I can keep track of my username. And then after it's done, I want to be able to navigate. I want to be able to navigate from the login straight to my chat component that I also have here. So ChatGPT already knows we want to use navigate there. Let me pull this up. Actually, I like this over here. I'm gonna pull this side by side. Cool. There's some information that I think I'll want to have, because whether it is my chat or my login, I'm gonna want to keep track of that username, right? Like I want to keep track and have that. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually just gonna push that to my parent, which is my app. Now you could, in theory, use like a user reducer, use context API. If it gets a little bit more complicated, if let's say you had multiple rooms, just like you do in Slack or something like that, or even Discord, you probably want to push this to something bigger, use Redux, something like that. But for the sake of this, it's okay if we just push that up a little bit. And so let's go ahead and create some state. So I'm going to say const username, and then set username, and we're going to set that equal to nothing, right? I'm just trying to add in some comments for it. Anybody that wants to add this, cool. But now I know, because I want to be able to use that in my children, I need to go ahead and I need to pass that in to my login, right? So I'm gonna say username equals username. Cool. I'm gonna have set username. It's going to be equal to set username. And then I also will need to end up passing in my socket because that's where I want to have some communication. And so what I'm going to say is socket equals socket. Perfect. So again, all I did was I lifted my state up to my parent. So that way, both my chat and my login page will be able to access this username and set username. And then also my socket as well. So when I come here, what I need to do is I need to destructure my props, right? The way that we're going to do that is we're just going to destructure in this portion. So I'm going to say username, set user name. Oops. Let me see. I can't remember if that was a capital N or not. Yeah, it is. And then I want socket. Cool. They're all just unused right now. I was like, what's going on there? Okay. Cool. So first off, I'm going to bring in my use navigate. So I'm going to say const navigate equals use navigate. Perfect. And then what I want to do is I'm going to create my form. So I'm going to just create a login. And I'm just going to create a form that is going to have really just a label that says username. I'm going to have an input of type text. That I'm going to end up needing to have a value of username. And then eventually, and then I'm gonna have to have an on change there. But then I've got this button of login. That's just easy to do. So I do need to have an on change here. So what I want to do is I want to be able to set my username every time there's a change. I could create its own function. Doesn't really make sense for just one input. So I can just do this inline where I have an on change equals. And then what I'm going to do is, oh, yep, on change equals. I'm going to have my event. And then I'm going to say set username. And then that's going to be my e.target.value. Perfect, as we know. And so now we're good to go, right? We've got this form set up. We've got a button and we've got our label. Now, what we'll also need to do is need to be able to handle that submit. So I'm going to say const handle submit. Handle submit. It's going to take in an event. And we're going to kind of look at this here in a second. We're using our const handle submit takes an event, eprevent default. That's not anything different. But something that is different is we now want to be able to use our socket to create an event, right, in our communication and say, hey, cool, I want to emit this. This is a built-in method that allows me to emit something to my backend, right? What I'm going to call that and send something to my backend. What I'm going to call that is I'm going to call this login. And then what I'm sending it is I'm saying, okay, cool. I want to call this method or this functionality on the backend. What I'm giving it is my username. I'm giving it as a username. I don't necessarily want this to be an object because it's just a username. It's just a string. So I can do that. Pass that in. Now on my form, I need my on submit. And that's going to be my handle submit. Perfect. Remove socket emit is missing props validation. Let's see. Props validation. What are we talking about here? I think we're good. I don't think we need anything. I think this will still work. It just is my linter. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So we're saying, okay, hey, I want to emit this methodology of login. So what I need to do is I need to go to my server. And then I need to actually create that functionality on my backend. Now, because I called it login, I need to make sure that I keep track of that information. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to say socket.on and saying, hey, on, and then I give my actual, I give my name for my event. So I say login. I will take in some data and then I can do something with it. Which here we'll handle this here in just a second. This is not what I want to do. But I want to keep track of my users, right? Because I'm logging in and I want to keep track of all the users that I have. I could do a lot of stuff. You could put this in state, but for right now, all we need to do is we just need to say something like let users, for the sake of this and the sake of time, because we got 23 minutes left, I'm going to, I'm just going to create array here. And so once this is done is I'm saying, okay, so listen for the event of login. And when this is called, which is what we're doing here, once we submit it, we're calling this event. And so our server's listening and it's finding, oh, yep, this is the event that we called. We're passing in some data. In this case, our data is just our username, right? And so then what we're saying is, great, I want to console that data, which should just be the username. And then the second thing I want to do is I want to push that data. Now there's two things I could do. I'm going to say users.push. And then I could just do data and that's just a list of my usernames, but I kind of want to have that ID as well if I wanted to have access to that, if I wanted to be able to handle that. So what I can do is actually create a object. So this will be an array of objects where I'm going to say something like name is data because that's all I'm passing in. I don't need a dot because this is just a string. Right. So I don't need, if that would have been an object like like it initially had it as, then I would have had to have like data.name or data dot whatever. But because data is just a string, we're saying, cool, the name is going to be that. The ID is going to be the socket ID, which we have access to because of this socket right here. And then once that's done, I'm pushing that. I've handled that. Now I'm saying, okay, well, what do you want to give it back? Right. And so what I can do is I can say io.emit. It's another built-in functionality. And what I can say is, I'm going to say new user. This is my event. And then what I want to pass it is I want to pass it my users. I got an extra little guy here. Cool. So what's kind of cool and with the process and the power of these is I can take an event. So if we're just kind of going back here, I have this on submit that created this event and I'm emitting it to my backend. My backend receives that by this name. These two names have to match. Bring that over here. This name and this name have got to match. So if I called this unicorn, I'd have to call this unicorn because that's what it's looking for, right? It's looking for the event that matches that. I'm passing it some data. This is a singular name. Passing it some data. which this is the data I'm passing it. And I'm saying, cool, I've got this data. I'm handling it. In this case, I'm pushing it just to this users array. And I'm pushing, name is the data. Again, data is just username. I could call this username. It doesn't really matter. Call it unicorn if you want. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm also saying, hey, there's an ID as well that I want to add in. That's a socket ID. And then it's saying, cool, I've got your event. Now let me emit something back to you, back to the front end. And so the front end says, okay, great. And we're emitting what we call a new user, and we're giving it, here's basically my response. You can kind of think about it that way. Where we're saying, great, I've got that, I have it, perfect. And so where that's going to happen is, or where that's really going to come into play is when we are dealing with our chat, right? So we've basically been able to, not basically, we've been able to log in. We've been able to emit a new message. So once people are logged in, we have this whole event of new user. And that gives me back my users array. And so what I can do is, as I navigate to chat, now what I can do is go to my chat component. And then I can actually take in that information, handle that information, and then show all my users out there. So let's go ahead. I'm gonna move this to the side for a bit, and let's go ahead and go into here. I am gonna need some use state for chat, right? So I'm gonna say use state. And then in order for me to immediately call back, then maybe I want to get all the users that are currently online. I'm going to use my use effect from React. Perfect. Now, if we're going back to my app.jsx, I am, well, I'm not getting any information yet, but I am going to want to pass in some information as I call it. What I do want to pass in is just my username. I don't need the chat to be able to set my username, so I don't need to do that. I just need my username and my socket. Because chat doesn't need to be able to set it, so I don't need to pass it in. If I pass it in, it wouldn't break anything. I just don't need to, Cool. So that's all done. Just go back to my chat. Now I need to destructure these. Again, I want to destructure these sort of inline. I don't really want to have to say, equals props. So what I can do is I can just come in here and say username, socket. Perfect. Oops. Looks like I got rid of that. See, perfect. So now I have those. And then I can start actually kind of handling everything else. Well, if I want my chat, if I want to have access to my users, right? Because that's what this is giving back, is going to be a list of users. Let's go ahead and create that in state. So I'm going to say const users. And then we're going to call that set users. And that's going to be equal to a list of, or an array, sorry. And then the second thing, eventually we're going to get to messages. We're not there yet. But the second thing I want to do is I want people to be able to type, right? And so let's go ahead and create my form. And so in here, we could say chat with friends. Perfect. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, yeah, I think that's a great idea. We could see who's online because we're going to have this list of users. We're going to have to use something in order to get it. But let's go ahead and map through all of my users. Cool. So that's going to tell me what users are currently online or who's logged in, right? Because every time that connection happens, we are going to grab that. And so in order for me to get that information, I need to do a use effect where I'm going to say use effect. I don't want to say socket.on users because I didn't call it users, right? I called it new user. So I'm going to say new user. And this is my event, new user. And so what we've got is we've got this new user that gives me my list of users. And we're saying, okay, great, new user. That's the event that we're listening for. We take in some data that we call users. That's what we're referring to it as. And then we're saying, hey, set users to whatever users we get back. So upon mounting, this is going to this event. It is getting this guy right here and my list of users, and it's setting my users here. So now I have this whole array of users. And then what we're doing is we're just simply mapping through these in an LI. So that way we just have our user. But this user's not going to work because I need a user.name. Because remember, this is an array of objects, because that's what we created right here. Cool. Okay, let's go ahead and spin this up. I think that's probably the best route. I broke the rule of code a little, test a lot. So let's go ahead and test. So I'm gonna need a new, I want to duplicate this. Okay. Okay, so I'm in my client. I'm gonna say npm run dev. Great, my client is working. I'm gonna cd into my server. Within my server, I'm going to say nodemon server.js. Oops. Oh, weird. I did serve.js. I don't even know that it says listening on port 8000. It's weird. I wonder if it just inferred.
Take some
Here.
abbreviation. If you misspell it, then it's no go.
Yeah. I'm confused. Super weird. Anyways, that's working. So let's go to localhost. 5173. And we get this socket.io practice. And so if this works right, first off, we can inspect console. We see that we do get this connected, which is from our front end. Sorry, it's from our login. Oh no, sorry, it is our backend. Where do we have connected? New client connected. Nope. Oh yeah, sorry, it's up here. It's our first use effect. We have our connected, and then we have our socket ID. And so that is right here. It's our connected. And here's the ID of this socket that we've got. So if this works out fine, if we coded correctly, we should be able to write a username, it redirect us to our chat, and it should give me my username. So if I say Will, now we see users online, Will. So if I come here and I duplicate, let's see, I don't want to go to chat. I want to come here. I've got this Will. So let me, yep, we'll keep that. It says Will. And then if I say, now you can see that it still shows that I'm on. And then I added Garrett, but on mine, you can see that it also adds Garrett, which is kind of cool. Because now, you know, we could have a third one that has this, and then we would constantly see, let me duplicate and say Joseph. And now all three of us, it works for each one of these windows. And so it's constantly, once an event happens, once a new user joins, it goes, grabs that information, and then it's showing it. So it's working exactly as we would expect. Cool. We've got 10 minutes left, so we'll keep on cruising. Last thing we want to do is we want to create a form here. So that way we can, oh, I just see there's something in the chat. Oh, this is good.
Oh, I just, yeah, just me.
No, you're good. You're good. Cool. So that's the last thing we want to do is we want to create a form. And then once we have the form, we'll add in our messages, and then we'll be able to message and go back and forth. So let's add in that form. After that, we have that, let's do a form. Let me the action. I am going to have an on submit, but we'll do that here in just a second. Where all I'm going to have is an input type text. Perfect. Ooh. Weird. Okay. Input type text. And it's just going to be, let's say our, I might have like a label that says message. And then input type submit. I like buttons better. I don't know why. Perfect. Cool. Now, same sort of thing. If we're going to add in a message, I need to make sure I have that information. So let's go ahead and we'll call this input because I'm going to want an entire array of messages because I want all messages collected. So I'm going to handle that there. So I'm going to call this input. So I'm going to say const input, set input, and that's going to be just empty to nothing because I'm waiting to see. And then what we'll do is we'll say, we'll have up here, we'll have a handle submit. And then what we do is we're going to handle this here in just a second, but we're going to grab the information and then we're going to end up creating an event where we want to send the message. And the message is going to be the input that we have. So we'll need to do our on change. So first off, we're going to say value equals input. Perfect. And then we'll also need to say our on change. On change is going to equal our E. It's an event and we set input. We're passing e.target.value. Perfect. So now as this changes, we're good to go. And then we are handling our handle submit. And then with my form, I need to say on submit is handle submit. Perfect. And so what this is doing is once we submit this form, it's taking our value. And again, we are emitting a message, an event to our backend. So we need to go make sure that we have that handled. We need to go to our backend, make sure that we have that all handled perfectly fine. So we called this send message. So let's come back here. And under this guy, we're still within our connection, still within our WebSocket. So let's create a new one. I'm going to call this socket.on. And we're calling this send message. Again, remember these have to be, these have to match, right? The event name has to match. And then what we're getting is some data. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, great. This is some data. Like we're calling this just our input, but really this is our message. So in the same way that we did this and we had our users, we're going to say let messages equal this. And so under this, we are going to say messages.push data, right? So we want to push our message into our array here. And again, this is just because we want to content to remove. Oh, okay. We just want to keep track of our messages for right now. We could do this in a database. We could do a whole bunch of stuff, but for the sake of this, that's all we're doing. Okay. And then we're emitting back a new message there. And so we can kind of handle that accordingly. So we've got that. We've set up our message. We're good to go there. And so now all we need to do is we're doing that. We're handling that. On our use effect, we're getting all of our users, right? But we can also you can do multiple things within a use effect. So I could say socket.on. Oops. I could say socket.on. And then what I want to do is I want to say on a new message. I want to take that message. And for right now, we're just console logging because we want to actually have a const messages, set messages, right? So I'm gonna say new message. Once I have that, I know I have curly brackets and all kinds of stuff everywhere. So we have our new message. We are console logging it just for ease of sake, but then we also want to set messages. And what we could do is that, but we're not adding sort of in time state and we're just pulling from here, right? So I don't really need all of this to like spread out because we're not using this on the front end, right? We're not handling that. We're just handling it from the back end. And so all I could just say is our set message is, our set messages is our MSG. Oops. It's just our, so I don't need all this. I could just say MSG. Anytime we send a message, it's going to come here. It's going to update this and then we're getting it back. So that's fine. Cool. Great. So we have that. Then let me get rid of that for aesthetic purposes. And then the last thing we'll want to do is we want to, now that we have this, maybe just show messages. And so let's just map through that. And then we're good to go. So we have our messages.map. And same thing that we did with our user. So now if we come here, let's make sure both of these are still up and running. New client connected. We're all good to go. Here I've got my send message. And if I say from this one, I say hello. Ooh, what happened here? Console message.map is not a function, disconnected. I forget to save messages.map.
Hmm.
When the code looks right, you just gotta sometimes spin everything up one more time. Let's see. Super good there. If I say will, log in, say hello. Messages.map is not a function. So it console logged. So what I'm getting is hello here. So we are where are we getting?
Hmm.
New message, spell it incorrectly. No. Data, MSG, console log, set messages. That's right.
Can you maybe after line 36 console log messages to see if you have that data within messages?
Yeah, let's do that. Don't. So it does not like something here. Let messages, MESSAGES, MESSAGES dot push data, console logging data. We're getting that on send message, input. We prevent default. Yeah. So I'm getting that information. It's not liking this. So I'm not even
Odd.
getting here.
Socket on. Let's servers.
Of course, I was like, man, this is getting like we're almost there. Nope. So that's not happening. This is not running.
Launch.
So we have socket.on, send message, passing in our data, we're doing message.push, messages.push. It's an array. And then we're emitting new message, passing in, or passing out data, but we want to pass out messages. That's what it is. Well, no, because why wouldn't that? Let's try that. I know that does not make sense, but yeah, that was it.
There it is.
So the issue was I was sending back data, not messages. And so we were expecting this to be our array. And it was not the case. So that's why we're getting the error. But now if we kind of go back, let's refresh this. Users online. Because I refreshed, it kind of cleared out all my data. So, and we'll say, well, log in. Oh, guess it didn't. I'll say hello. Kept all that information. Oh, I gotta kill my server. And then if I kill my server, but it doesn't matter because what I could do is this. And if I say Garrett, and I say, it's not going to show it right now because we haven't gotten all the messages. We could do that on our first one. But it could say hello, and then all of the messages should pop up. Yeah. That's because in our use effect right here, we're just grabbing the users, but I could grab users and messages and then do that and then be a-okay. But that's really it. So you can see that now we can, let's say multiple people are online. We could build this out. Socket.io is a great one. You could build rooms. That's what we were going to do today, but we kind of went back from the beginning just so that way we could really fully understand that, walk through that with Joseph. But we could really build out users online. You could take this information that we have. If you wanted to make it, kind of down here, a little window with maybe a picture. We had some information. If we knew who was joining, if we had that in the database where they actually had to log in, we could, they had a profile picture, we could pull all that information and be able to show that here in the same way that we have Slack or Discord, something of that nature. So are there any questions on what we just talked about, all the code that we just talked about, Joseph? And it was kind of a lot and a little bit different, but really the thing to think about is it's just event listeners. And so we're just setting up events on each side. And so because it's open communication, we're saying, hey, new user, you got that? Yep, cool, boom. New user or, log in, you got that? Yep, cool. And then sending information back and forth.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I guess my question's a little bit of a selfish question. I'm going into projects and algorithms next. And one of the personal projects I wanted to work on was building basically Twitter circa 2015 or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was going through Python, there was like a brief section where they're like, yeah, you could build Twitter at some point, but I'd be curious to do it through event listeners like this. And I guess my next question about this messaging in particular is how would you create it in a way that it would pop up on the side like that? And how could you I guess have a messaging component that hides itself as a tab? Because you know how sometimes messages will pop up on the side and then it goes down to the side and you click and it comes back up. Like, how do you create that, I guess?
Yeah, great question. So that would be like a lot of CSS and JavaScript. to basically you're getting this information, and then you could say, once this happens, kind of here you would set up some information on, if a certain piece of state, like, any new message, like new messages, and maybe that's set to false. And then once that's true, if, you come and bring this in, it's new messages. Once that's true, then maybe some sort of animation happens or some sort of CSS. In the same way that we had conditionals for when you fill out a form, and, if you didn't type the email, or if you didn't type the name long enough, we had that ternary operator that said, hey, you got to do this. You could do something of that nature, to where you have this, and maybe you have a piece of state that you're monitoring and saying, is there any new messages? And it's not just kind of popping up. But if there is a new message, instead of just, siphoning through, maybe then you have that information, you put it in state, and then they click it. And then once they click, then a modal comes up or something comes up, and then you're grabbing that information from state and you're viewing that on, again, a modal or some sort of little window. That would be an option you could do. Much more advanced than this, in regards of, you would want to set up a user that's logging in, so that way you can associate the person and their ID with the message, so that way you can see who did what. You'd want to have a message model in your background. So if you're doing this in Node, you'd have a model for message as well. That would then be connected with our user to see which user did that message, or basically an array of messages on my user model. And then you could just query the database there. I think Twitter is different than Slack, and that's the only thing I would say is, usually with Twitter, there's stuff kind of constantly coming, but you're refreshing to get the new stuff. Whereas basically you're sending a new request. Whereas this is just a socket that's opened up, right? To where you're not seeing, it's not like, you're scrolling Twitter and every single time, or X or whatever it's called, every single time a new tweet comes, it just refreshes and populates. Oftentimes, it's sort of static. You lazy load, or you get, the first 20, and then it's constantly, then it's kind of loading on the background. But then once you refresh it, then a new 20 comes. And so those are a little bit different, I would say. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does.
Yeah. But
Thank-
that'd be a great idea. Plus, there's also plenty of resources online, for building a Twitter clone or a Discord clone or a Slack clone, that you could get some ideas there.
Sweet, thanks.
Yeah, of course. Okay. Well, that'll be it. That's all I've got for class today. I hope, Joseph, that you have a wonderful night. Tomorrow I'll talk a little bit about career stuff if anybody's there. If people are interested, I will happily talk about kind of careers and things I wish I would have known. So that'll be it for tomorrow.